For LGBTQ Pride Month, let's look back at the seminal milestones of the community's progress. Welcome to MsMojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 important LGBTQ moments in history. Before we begin, we publish new videos every day, so be sure to subscribe for more great content. For this list, we're looking at key events in the history of the LGBTQ movement in the US, and focusing on the group as a whole rather than individual achievements. This means that Ellen DeGeneres coming out, while groundbreaking, won't be on our list today.
Susan, I'm gay.
Also, while the introduction of bills and laws are definitely monumental, we're excluding events like the introduction of the Equality Act, and instead focusing on bills once they've been passed.
The Equality Act provides comprehensive protections on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity.
Number 10. Stonewall Riots. This 1969 event is often cited as having kicked off the American gay rights movement. The Stonewall Inn was a popular gay bar in New York City's Greenwich Village, and it was common for establishments catering to the LGBTQ community to be targets for police raids. On June 28, 1969, however, the patrons of the Stonewall Inn decided to fight back.
There were thousands of people involved out in the streets opposing the police. Nothing like that had ever happened before.
Many of those present that night were people of color. The clash ended up lasting for days, with community organizers rallying to fight for safe spaces for these marginalized members of society. In the years that followed, the gay rights movement took enormous strides.
We wear our hair in curls, we wear no underwear, we show up here.
Number 9. First Pride Parades. On the first anniversary of the events that took place at the Stonewall Inn, celebrations were organized nationwide to commemorate that pivotal moment. Parades were held in New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. These events weren't actually referred to as Pride Parades in the 70s, but rather as gay liberation marches or gay freedom marches. The parades have since expanded to take place worldwide, and have gained a more festive vibe over the years, in a slight shift from the original spirit of activism and protest.
We've gone from being, criminals and, psychopaths to becoming full citizens and part of society in a way I never dreamed we would.
Number 8. The Transsexual Phenomenon. Harry Benjamin was a doctor specializing in endocrinology and sexology, whose work has been linked to the progress of the trans movement. Benjamin was a colleague of the famed Alfred Kinsey, who introduced him to a child who was born male and wanted to transition to being female. Rather than discourage the process, Benjamin studied the medical possibilities for cases such as this. In 1966, he published his seminal work, The Transsexual Phenomenon, which outlined the procedure by which people could transition from one sex to the other. Prior to this, trans people were treated with electroconvulsive therapy, or even lobotomy to rid them of their predilections.
Biology loves differences. Society hates it.
Number 7. The American Psychiatric Association removes homosexuality from list of mental disorders.
0 being exclusively heterosexual and 6 being exclusively homosexual. A great many people line up somewhere in the middle.
Published in 1968, the Second Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM-2, listed, among many other conditions, homosexuality. Sadly, this view was in line with the thinking and practices of the age.
In fact, there have been tremendous advances in science in terms of curing homosexuality. There's something called shock aversion therapy.
In 1973, however, the American Psychiatric Association called for a vote among its members on whether they thought homosexuality should be classified as a disorder or not. A significant majority voted to remove it, but ended up replacing it with a sexual orientation disturbance. It was arguably only in 1987 that it was completely removed from the DSM.
The APA took leadership in this country in ensuring that the discrimination did not continue.
Number 6. First International Conference on Transgender Law and Employment Policy. Phyllis Randolph Fry, a prominent trans activist, and as of 2010, associate judge, has organized a series of critical conferences discussing transgender rights and the law over the years. The first one took place in Houston, Texas in 1992, and was attended by law professionals as well as trans community members. Many of the presentations and discussions were transcribed, and went on to be printed for public use. These documents, referred to as the reference books, went on to serve as the building blocks for various studies on legal challenges of the trans community.
What do I call a transgender person? It's so confusing. Well, actually, it's pretty simple. Call them whatever they want to be called.
Number 5, Matthew Shepard Act.
If you have kids, teach them that words end up killing people.
The full name of the law is the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which serves to commemorate 2 victims of hate crimes in the U.S. The act serves as an expansion on the United States federal hate crime law of 1969 by adding amendments for crimes based on perceived gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability.
When Matt was killed, there were no federal hate crime laws protecting sexual orientation.
President Barack Obama signed the act into law in 2009, which additionally requires the FBI to track crime statistics based on gender and gender identity, which they previously had not done.
Because no one in America should ever be afraid to walk down the street holding the hands of the person they love.
Number 4, sexual orientation is added to the military's anti-discrimination policy.
The wording of it is really misleading because it makes people think that under the policy you can be gay, lesbian, or bisexual and serve, but just not talk about it.
In 1994, then-President Bill Clinton instituted the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, which stopped LGBTQ people from openly serving in the U.S. military. This caused approximately 13,000 people to be removed from military service.
The reason I accepted it was because I thought it was better than an absolute ban, and because I was promised it would be better than it was.
In 2010, Barack Obama signed a repeal act into law, but it wasn't until 2015 that a positive change was made to the Army's anti-discriminations policy. Now, sexual orientation is listed under the Military Equal Opportunity Program as a protected class, meaning that members cannot be discriminated against because they are gay. Number 3, California bans insurance discrimination against transgender patients.
Even just within the check-in process, I was misgendered. I finally spoke to the doctor, and he came in and was speaking to me as if I was a 13-year-old girl.
In the early 2010s, the Department of Managed Healthcare, or DMHC, finally ensured that insurance companies complied with California's mid-2000s enactment of the Insurance Gender Non-Discrimination Act. This law was a landmark decision in terms of transgender healthcare rights.
It deals with healthcare that people are not quite familiar with, but it does exist.
Despite the act, however, some insurance companies still attempted to limit funds given for gender reassignment surgeries and other costs pertaining to a gender transition. By officially banning exclusions for people who identify as transgender or gender non-conforming through this directive, the state guaranteed that trans people would have the same access to health insurance as everyone else living in the state. Number 2, President Obama acknowledges the LGBTQ community in the State of the Union address.
That we are still more than a collection of red states and blue states. That we are the United States of America.
Even before he was first elected in 2008, Barack Obama positioned himself as a champion for all people, including those from the LGBTQ community. Under his leadership, many strides were made towards ultimate equality, but one of his most significant gestures was a subtle one. In his State of the Union address in 2015, the president said the words lesbian, bisexual, and transgender.
That's why we defend free speech and advocate for political prisoners and condemn the persecution of women or religious minorities or people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender.
This was the first time these words had ever been spoken during such an address. This may not be significant upon first thought, but when you think about how he acknowledged a community that's so used to being marginalized just by saying those words, then its importance becomes much more clear.
I don't know if he knows how many lives he's changing by just saying that simple thing.
Before we unveil our top pick, here are a few honorable mentions.
The federal government says transgender people could now be eligible for sex reassignment surgery under Medicare.
Number 1, U.S. Supreme Court rules same-sex marriage is legal in all 50 states.
I had a great weekend. I got gay married so many times this weekend. Like 40 times.
The road to the legalization of same-sex marriage in the United States was a long and challenging one. In 2004, Massachusetts became the first state to allow marriage between same-sex partners, and many states followed in the preceding years. In 2013, the Defense of Marriage Act, which legally defines marriage as between a man and a woman, was struck down by the Supreme Court. Nonetheless, there continue to be challenges even in states that recognize these unions. As of June 26, 2015, however, the Supreme Court ruled that it's unconstitutional for individual states to forbid marriage between same-sex couples.
This morning, the Supreme Court recognized that the Constitution guarantees marriage equality.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out these other great clips from MsMojo and subscribe for new videos every day.